Okay, the next lecturer and the last one is Professor Elisheva Revel. She is the former chair of the Department of Art History, the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. She also served as head of the interdisciplinary program of the Faculty of Humanities. She held the Nicolaus Landau Chair for Art History, and her studies were published in 3 books and many articles. So, Elisheva, please. Remember, this is the art part of the book.
Let me start by saying that I am pleased, very pleased, of having been able to join this very impressive meeting of scholars, including my own nephews and niece. And it's with pleasure that I render this homage to Michel, with pleasure but also with a great measure of pride, because in fact Michel is my brother-in-law. This is not a scholar who is somebody special. He's an immense scholar and a Talmid Chacham. And he has knowledge in so many different domains that he has even touched what is very important for our tradition and breeding, the relationship between Jews and Christians, and for myself in the Middle Ages. The interest of Michel goes very far into the discourse of the polemical theology of the controversy between Jews and Christians in the Middle Ages. I offer him this lecture in homage and in love for all we are doing together. Why is it so important in the history of art to scrutinize the iconography of the Bible in the Judeo-Christian tradition? In fact, what is art giving us, which can be added to all what we heard today? Art, at least in the Middle Ages, is not a static object. It's not only a case of searching for something aesthetic and beautiful. Art is a medium, a language, a dialogue between 2 religions, between 2 spiritual worlds. What we will see here is a historical document, and we have to look at that like a document. The work of art is a text to decipher. I will start with somewhere we were children at that time together. Not enough. Thank you. The Cathedral in Strasbourg, where during our young years we went through the south portal of the cathedral and saw what is symbolizing the relationship between Jews and Christians, the allegory of Ecclesia and synagogue. At the same time, we discovered what the life of the Jews were in the beautiful town of Strasbourg during those same Middle Ages. They could work in the town, mostly usury, and they had, under the death penalty, to leave the town in the evening. A horn was sounded from the cathedral, the Grüßel horn, the terrific horn, which pushed the Jews out of the town until the morning. This allegory, which we can see here marked by the, here? Yeah, Ecclesia and synagogue, reunites 2 women who symbolize the church and the Bet Knesset, the synagogue, the assembly of the Christians and the assembly of the Jews. But it did not start in Strasbourg. In fact, the use of an allegory representing the community of a religious people starts in Canticum, in Song of Songs, in Shir HaShirim, where sponsus and sponsa, like the Christian theologians say, the bride and the bridegroom are seen together as the community of the Jewish people and the divine presence. But here we are dealing with something totally different. The basis of this allegory and the antinomy between the two feminine allegories are obvious. They don't start in Strasbourg on the 12th century. What we have here is the beauty of the statues, the Gothical style, the fact that they have different attributes. The church has a crown and holds the crucifix. The synagogue here has a flag which is broken, and the tablets of the law falling down, which means she has no value anymore. But more of that, you will see that she cannot see. She has a veil over her eyes. When we go and start to find a way of understanding why there are two, these women, why Ecclesia is not enough by herself, we have to look at one of the most important texts of Paulus, one of the students of Jesus, where he says in Galatians 4, where he says, and it's in yellow here, Abram had two sons, one of the slave woman and the other by the free woman. His son by the slave woman was born in the ordinary way, but his son by the free woman was born as a result of a promise. Until now we agree totally. Is Isaac born from Sarah and Abram? These things may be taken figuratively, which is what happens in Christian theology in the Middle Ages. Those things are archetypes written in the Bible, and they should be understood only through the Christian interpretation. The women represent two covenants. Still agree with Paulus. There is the Old Testament and the New Testament. There is the Tanakh and the Christian Testament. But what does the scripture say, goes Paulus on? Get rid or drive out, according to the translation, it was written in Latin, of the slave woman and her son. Who is a slave woman? According to what he said before, a slave woman could only be Agar, but it's not. It's not. It is Sarah, the slave woman and her son, for the slave woman's son will never share in the inheritance with the free woman's son. From this text comes the expression which was used very much in the Middle Ages, Verus Israel, the real Israel, is the son of the promise, the son of Agar, and not the son of Sarah. So we have here the opposition between two women, one being Ecclesia, the real covenant, and the other one being the slave woman, whose son is to be pushed out. The physical allegory, the figuration of it, starts in the Carolingian times, 9th century, on the covers of prayer books or Bibles. Ivory covers, very beautiful, which figure nearly in every museum of the European states. And it figures the crucifixion, which is clearly the time where Sorry. No. Want to go back? Yeah. No. Okay. Christ is in the middle. On one side, Mary, Ecclesia. He is looking towards her. On the other side, which it does not interest him at all, a woman about whom we don't know anything. There is no description. There are even no attributes like we see in Strasbourg later on. But her feet are directed towards the end of the pictures, towards the outside of the cover, and her head is turned with Jesus, but she does not understand what's going on. Another ivory, where we see again synagogue leaving. Another one, and this time it's much clearer. Ecclesia, next to the disciples, to an angel, and another angel coming out down from the sky, pushing the head of synagogue towards the earth. She cannot see, but not because she doesn't want to see, because the angel prevents her from seeing. One of the examples you can find of ecclesia and synagogue all over Europe. In France, in England, in Germany, there are masses of cathedrals, generally on the south portal, not always, never in the inside of the cathedral, on the outside. This is Trier, I do always the same. Sorry. This is synagogue. Ecclesia is on the other side. She is along with Eve and one of the disciples, who may be Paul, but it's not inscribed. She also has, like in Strasbourg at the same time, her eyes covered by a veil. This refers to a text of the Jewish Bible, of the text of Lamentations, of Echa. Al ze haya dave libenu, al ele chashchu enenu. For this our heart is faint, for these things our eyes are dim. She is not blind, she becomes blind. She is somebody who is not able anymore to see. Where does this idea from the covered eyes come from? Do you know that sculpture? That's Michelangelo in San Pietro in Vincoli in Rome. Much later, Moses has horns, nothing else. If you check the biblical text, you discover that the skin of the face of Moses when he came down from Mount Sinai had sent forth beams. It shone. And the people of Israel were afraid to get close to him. So he covered his face with a veil when he stopped talking to God. But when he went back to talk to God inside the sanctuary, he took off his veil and could speak with him. All the times he spoke to the people, he had his face covered. Now, what has that to do with the figuration of Michelangelo? The translation of the Septuaginta, the original Greek version of the Bible for the Christians, translation was made by Jews in the 70 before the Christian era, but it was used by the first Christians until Jerome in the 4th century translated it into Latin. The translation holds cornuta erat facies. His face was shining or springing horns. So it depends on the way you interpret the text of Madeleine Hall, who was a great theologian, and she worked on a wonderful translation into French by the Septuaginta. She said, you see, the Septuaginta is not culpable of this tradition. It does not come from here, it comes from the Latin. Again, what does that have to do with what we are doing today? Moses' veil is interpreted differently in the Byzantine, in Cyprus, Sami ambassador. You will find probably some pictures of Moses with rays shining from his face and no veil and no horns. And also in the Christian tradition during all the Middle Ages, he has horns according to the Latin tradition. This is a Jewish manuscript, the Regensburg Pentateuch in the Israel Museum. And here we see Moses getting down from Mount Sinai and giving the tablets of the law to the children of Israel. No horns, no veil, only one thing, which does not differentiate Moses from the people of Israel. The Judenhut, the hat with 3 points, which was imposed on the Jews during the Middle Ages by the Fourth Council of Laterano in 1215. Jewish art is not interested in the rays, the horn, the veil of Moses. Byzantine art is not interested anymore. The result, Byzantine art doesn't have any of the figurations Western art has of Ecclesia and synagogue. Jewish art, of course, doesn't use these designs. Now you have here 3 examples. There are many examples. I have written a very long article about that. But you can find all sorts of different expressions of the pushing out of the son of the servant. All those 3 examples come from France, Germany, and the second one in Marburg. We'll start with this. An angel here pushes synagogue outside of the picture of the crucifixion. Here you see a detail from that theory. Another angel pushes Ecclesia towards Jesus. The blood falls into the chalice, which represents the Eucharist. Synagogue loses the tablets of the law. She loses the crown she had, and her eyes are blindfolded by a veil, which is a wrong interpretation of Moses' veil. Moses used the veil not to frighten the people of Israel. In that case, the veil is used as an instrument of voluntary blinding by the synagogue. Here, Ecclesia, with the chalice, takes the crown from the head of synagogue, which is blinded. Very quickly, from the beginning of the 13th century, are added a lot of attributes which are supposed to be, again, aggressive and negative. Here in Marburg, Ecclesia, and synagogue holding the head of a goat. There was a very specific zoology in the Middle Ages, and each beast, animal, domestic or savage, had a symbol, a meaning. The goats were supposed to be dirty, stinking, and having a behavior which was, even for the beasts, something which was not acceptable by nature. One of the best examples, and here I come back to our native Alsace, is a page of a manuscript which was burned during the 1870 war between Germany and France. But by chance it was copied in black and white before it was burned down. Hortus Deliciarum, the Garden of Delicacies, which is a book written and illustrated by a woman called Herade von Landsberg, who lived in the monastery of Saint-Odile over Aubernais, which was the hometown of our family. She's a very, very bright, learned, and able lady. Her purpose is to give to her nuns all what they have to know about history, theology, philosophy, and ethics. She chooses here a scene of the crucifixion, which explains other miniatures of her book. Oh, pardon. Jesus, Ecclesia, riding on a beast which is made of the symbols of the four evangelists, the lion, the beef, the man, and the eagle. Each one of the evangelists has a symbol in medieval art. Resurrection here from the dead. All are going back to being what they were, in chair. Here, only a skeleton. Over him, synagogue, riding an ass, and not a beautiful beast, and sitting the wrong way, sitting regarding the end of the ass and the end of the road, holding what is supposed to be what is left to her from the tablets of the law, holding a goat, a broken flag, blinded, and even the ass doesn't know what to do. He has lost his way. He has lost the way of knowing where he goes. Worse than that. Here is synagogue killing the symbol of Jesus, the Agnus Dei, inside. Mais alors, inside this medallion, it's Jesus and the cross. Here is Ecclesia, which means that exactly like in the text of Paulus, the Jews still want to attack the Christians. They still want to kill Jesus like they did at the beginning of times. One of the most beautiful examples of Ecclesia and synagogue. Ecclesia, triumphant, with a crown, a chalice, the cross, and synagogue, which is no more than a dead woman trying to hold her head. She doesn't see, she doesn't know what's happening. But we are in 1140. And something else is appearing in the Middle Ages. In Saint-Denis, in France, an abbot has a monastery and is building a church, the Basilica of Saint-Denis, where the French kings will be buried later on. And he writes down every part of the program of his church. He writes it down in verses as poetry, but based on theology. He introduces into the stained glass windows, of which you see one of them, this little medallion, of which you see here a bigger image and here a detail. This is synagogue, and this one is Ecclesia. He's crowning Ecclesia on one side, and what is he doing to synagogue? He's lifting her veil. Quod Moses velat, Christi doctrina revelat. כך הוא כתב. What Moses is veiling, the doctrine of Christ is revealing. It's a play between the two words, velat and revelat. Here he comes back to the meaning of the veil on Moses' figure. And he is citing another text by Paulus, a text of Corinthians 3. Not like Moses, who would put a veil over his face so that the Israelites might not gaze at the outcome of what was being brought to an end. The Old Testament was being brought to an end, and he didn't want them to know, but their minds were hardened. This is different now from the biblical text. For this, to this day, when they read the Old Covenant, that same veil remains unlifted, because only through Christ is it taken away. Yes, to this day, Paulus, it's not the 12th century, but it's still read anywhere, and theologians use Paulus very much. Whenever Moses is read, a veil lies over their hearts. But when one turns to the Lord, the veil is removed. Cum autem conversus fuerit, ad Deum offertur velamen. God will lift the veil. There were a few, very few, figurations using Suger's text and another very important theologian, Honorius from Autun, who wrote a book which is called Synagoga Conversa, and where he used this idea of the veil being lifted for the Jews to be part of the program of God. Here we have a beautiful example of a Bible which is in London, in the Lambeth Palace. Here, the detail of Fertur Verlamen. Here, one of the students of Jesus, John, and the hand comes out from the sky. Moses is holding synagoga upright. The hand, dextera Dei, the hand of God, is unveiling synagogue, and she's part of the design of God. Now, this is an important part of something which has an influence this time also on Jewish art. Not only did it mean for a very small part of Christian theologians the possibility of not a rejection, but a reconciliation. The fact that one day, at the end of the days, the Christians may recognize the part of the Jews in the universe, the part of the Jews in the program of God. And you have to remember that 1145, 40 and 45. In 44 happened the first blood libel in Anglia, in England. The first time the Jews were accused to use the blood of a Christian child to prepare the matzot. From then on, the whole Middle Ages were full of those special mythology which was meant to be a requisitory against the Jews. At the same time, the Second Crusade started by exterminating on its way the Jews in Europe. And where they were not put to death, they had to deliver all what they had, houses, shops, money, in order to finance the crusade. We have here something special which influenced for example, the Mahzor from the 14th century, much later, in the Leipzig University, a piyut, which is part of the Canticum from Shir HaShirim, Iti Levanon Kala, from You Come to Me from Lebanon, My Bride, shows something which we don't look at the details, would look like the coronation of the Virgin on the tympanums of the cathedrals. The Christian theology has it that Maria didn't die a human death, but the day of she was supposed to be buried, Jesus sent an angel who took her close to him, body and soul, and she sits for eternity next to him like a crowned queen. Here we have one person, a man, and another person, a woman, sitting on the same bench, like Jesus and Maria. But it's Shir HaShirim. This time it is synagogue, Bet Knesset, Knesset Israel, and the divine. How can we recognize them? The man, you see here a detail, the man has a Juden hat, a Jewish hat, which still was in use until the 17th century. The woman has a crown. She's a queen. But she has also, look at this little round decorative motif on her clothes, which is something you know also, the rotula. One of the identity signs that the same concile in Laterano, 1215, obliged the Jews to wear on their clothes, on the front and sometimes even on the back. They had to be differentiated from the Christians so that they would not be able to mix up with the Christians' community. They stayed very late as an element of shame for the Jewish community, and in this case, there was the rotula in Germany, there were tablets of the door in England, there were different sorts of hats, there were even little clocks, little bells on the seam of the women's dress so that it could be heard coming. More interesting is this unique image, unique miniature of a Machzor, a prayer book for the holidays, that is today in Hamburg, where my husband and me, we have been a very long time in Hamburg, and at this time I didn't even see the manuscript, I discovered it later. Again, the same text, the same idea, the bridegroom with the Juden hat, and the synagogue are represented as the bride with the crown, and this time her eyes are veiled. This time they appropriate the way the Christians, art makers, theologians saw the Jews. So we come back not to the horns, but to the blinded eyes. At the end of the Shoah, the end of the war, Albrecht Goes, who was a Protestant theologian, wrote a book called Das Brandopfer. He talks about the Shoah, he talks about the relationship between Jews and Christians, and at the end he says, the synagogue, sie ist es, die sieht. She is it that sees. She's blinded, but she sees. How can she see when she is blinded? And here it is time to relate to Michel. How goes the text of the Bible when the people of Israel are at the foot of Mount Sinai? And it is written, V'kol ha'am ro'im et hakolot. And the whole people sees the voices. Like synagogue, to see without your eyes, you can see and hear. You see the voices. Michel, you see the voices. You transform the voices that you see in your vision, but you don't do it only yourself. We saw today everybody, and it's only a very small part, imagine, of what you do and who comes with you. But there is a saying that behind every great man, there is a woman. And she's not behind, she's next to you. Even if she sits over there, she's next to you. At each second, at each moment, at each joy, at each sadness, at each accomplishment. And we hope for many years at what you are going to do together, in cooperation, in your vision, by seeing the voices. Thank you all.